Philip, I have a suggestion for the tap and hold calls, since right now using tap and hold calls is so hard. Really. Maybe pressing the call buttons normally does the tap variation, okay? And when you hold Alt and press the call buttons, it does the hold variation. Regardless, I think the problem with the calls now is actually a bug. It seems that tapping and hold is not making any difference. I don't know if that's code based, the programming code based, or if it's because changes made it on the sounds. So I need to check that with Will and take a look why that's not working as intended. It was before, so I'm kind of confused. But yeah, we could change the inputs if necessary. I don't know. Let's see, more questions.
Oh, and to answer that question, we were actually last week discussing going over the characters' movements being a little, not being as smooth as we want them to. So those changes will probably be being rolled out over time. So you may see them in update 4, you may not, but you'll be seeing them at some point.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that we work in parallel that sometimes we don't mention, or if we mention, but we don't give a when we are going to release. So like the scar thing that people asked me earlier, if it's gonna be updated for or not. It really depends when it's finished, pretty much. So. Jehel, can you try to explain the Everyman game mode thing a bit more, please? A lot of people, I think, are pretty confused about all that. Everyman game mode.
Okay,
What is that?
so I think what people didn't really understand about that, which because again, and this is kind of in reference to what I said earlier, and that how we speak as developers versus what you guys understand just as the community on the outside, there can be a huge disconnect between them. So if I'm hearing the community correctly, what you guys ultimately want to know is if you're going to be able to play as your favorite dinosaurs. And the answer to that is yes. Is that generally been the bottom line that everyone wants to know? And I mean, we've repeated that over and over, but
I think the problem is that when we say, "Oh, this dinosaur is not going to be in the main survival mode," they think it's not going to be playable. It's not true because
yeah, that's not the same thing. Those two
yeah,
things are mutually exclusive.
you could play in a custom server that allows that, or maybe in a sandbox mode or different mode that's not specifically the survival one. So
Yeah, or also we can have multiple survival modes that have dinosaurs at different
exactly.
periods, et cetera, et cetera. But for right now, the entire what we're doing right now with Ivrima is we're trying to get that information and those metrics on the smaller like sized animals, not the massive apexes, because you guys have to remember, we have all of that information on apexes from Legacy. We know how those animals interacted with one another and how that played out. We already know all of that. So now we're trying to get some different player data, and that's why a lot of the creatures that are in Avrima are smaller sized. And the Deinosuchus, for instance, was allowed to come in at the size that it is because it is restricted to living in the water. So it is not a giant apex running around destroying everyone on the server.
Yeah.
And the Stegosaurus came in more as a gift because at that time, it was either get the Stegosaurus or not, because the Stegosaurus was really close to being complete and we could deliver that to you. So we assumed you guys would have rather had another playable than not.
Yep. And it kind of works well with Dinosuchus because it helps to balance the population
Yeah.
of both.
And it's slow, and it can't really dominate the same way Apexes have been known to dominate servers, like in the legacy days, for instance.
Yeah.
And the reason we want to get a lot of this information and stuff now is because with the types of mechanics and the type of combat and gameplay that we're inserting into Avrima versus legacy, Apexes will be able to do a ton more devastation in Avrima than they were ever able to do in legacy. So we really have to make sure that we're tailoring these experiences in a way that's going to feel good and feel rewarding when you do play as an Apex. But we just want to make sure that we get a lot of this information about how our different characters interact with one another, with our smaller roster, with all these abilities that they have, before we start inserting, big, bad, huge Apexes that can really wreck shop. Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, you're getting scared of apexes now. Yeah, I wonder how many people in the community have stopped to think about an apex predator with a brand new bag of mechanics that you have never seen before,
Right.
and allows them to do a ton more than what they were ever able to do in Legacy. Because in Legacy, you guys, there's a lot of that tail riding and stuff like that. That does not exist anymore
Pretty bad that thing. Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. Imagine
That
imagine Dinosuchus in Legacy. I mean, without lunge, without everything, it would be so.
it would be
It would
unplayable.
be so stupid. It would be so bad. It's just a log, log, a biting log that floats the river. I mean, what the fuck? So I'm still downloading the game. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not in a rush. I mean, it's just. Well, in my defense, this thing is big. Look at that. Jesus. Okay, well, let me see. When Update 3 came out, seemed like your approach to combat balance was rock, paper, scissors style. What? So Utah more than Stego, Utah to Stego to Croc, for example. How accurate do you think that is for your approach to combat balance?
I don't think that
Mm,
assessment, in my opinion, I don't think
yeah,
that assessment is very accurate, because unlike with Legacy, which is exceptionally rock, paper, scissors, when it comes to Arima, a lot of the balance doesn't even really come from us. And I'll explain what that means. It comes from you guys. It comes from how well you guys are able to utilize the mechanics that you're given. Because while some of you may find that you struggle against certain opponents, others may play the exact same species as you, and they excel at it. So the balance that we're trying to do with Arima is primarily based upon the prowess of the player. And we have to take that into account every step of the way when we release a creature. So we try to just give them some general agency and some options as far as their mechanics are concerned. But what you guys ultimately end up doing with them shapes how we end up having to balance the game. And I think that that pretty much applies to every video game out there.
yeah. I think in this case of he mentioned it's because you have a small roster right now, so it feels like that this kills this thing, that thing kills this thing, because it's just 8 or 9 playables. In the
Yeah,
future, it's
exactly.
going to be much more several kill several, so you don't feel like that anymore. Um, Hello, Scope. How you doing? The chat is delayed. Sorry. Okay, let me update myself. Ask again if I don't. So, what do you think of an ontogenetic diet shifts? What is that? Do you think that diet should shift and change as you grow? Oh,
That's something that we've already been discussing. I
it,
don't know if you remember that, Lipe. You
yeah,
probably forgot.
it could be an option, but that would be so hard to design. If you're if the if the species that you are supposed to eat change as you grow. How we balance that? So yeah,
Well, like a certain amount of that is going to end up, having to be the case anyway, because, depending on the size of your creature, like, I mean, a rabbit's not really going to do a whole lot when you're an adult,
yeah.
versus when you're a juvenile. So we've had those sorts of discussions
We,
a couple of times.
yeah, that's why we have more than one. So, for example, if in your list you have a rabbit and a Dinosuchus, for example, and you are a hex, well, when you are small, you can eat the rabbit, and then you become big. The rabbit doesn't feel you, so you should eat dinos, for example, right? You choose, not us, kind of thing. Um,
How frequently people have to eat? Oh, that'd be a balanced question. Jack could answer that better than I could. And again, like I mentioned before, with balance, is that's going to be up to QA, and we have a lot of our processes that we do, a lot of the stuff that we do insert into the game obviously comes directly from some of the information that QA gives us, some of the information once it goes live, or it's you guys have play tested it. We get that information from you guys where it's like, okay, it's a little too difficult or it's a little too easy, etc. And then we start pushing and pulling those levers to get it into a comfortable space. I think sometimes there's this mentality that in a multiplayer survival setting like we have, especially one that deals specifically with animals and creatures, that we're just going to nail the perfect balance right out of the gate, and that's just not realistic. That's not how it's going to shake down pretty much ever, because we have to get the information on how well the mechanics for those creatures are even being delivered on, how long it takes to grow for the average player, how long it takes to grow for the top tier, knows exactly what to do player, etc. So usually it takes a while for us to find those certain perfect balances of how long it needs to take for you to
yeah,
get all your diet stuff. It takes a while. It's not something we can just nail right out of the gate, unfortunately.
yeah, and it changes every time we add a new dinosaur. So, because if we
Yeah,
introduce like, for example, the T Rex, well, we need to rebalance everything again, So it's
yeah. I think the Deinosuchus is probably the best example of that, Lipe. So for you guys in the stream currently, remember what your play style was like in the game, even if you want to take legacy into account. As soon as we dropped the Deinosuchus, it became a totally different experience map wide every time you went to take a drink. It became a totally different experience. Now you guys are nervous going down there to get a sip, when
yeah,
previously you just did whatever you wanted all willy nilly and it wasn't a big deal. And that same sort of model applies to really any creature that we add to the game. It can fundamentally change the entire ecosystem of the island. It's pretty much the same way that is mirrored in the natural world, where if you take one animal that didn't exist in an area and you throw it in there, it throws everything out of balance,
yeah,
and then everything has to learn to live with it or learn to combat a foe that never existed previously. Much like where I'm from in Florida, where people started releasing all those Burmese pythons into the Everglades, and then they're killing all of the raccoons, they're killing all of the other native wildlife, because this is just something that never existed before, and everything has to, in a real world setting, rebalance itself around that being a factor.
yeah.